The alarm sirens didn't blare, those were reserved for atmospheric breaches and quantum detonations. Instead, the lights along Habitat Section 9 flickered red, pulsing in rhythm with the soft but urgent tone of a containment alert. Inside the glass-paneled observation deck, dozens of aliens, xenobiologists, diplomats, and hazard-mitigating dignitaries watched the live feed of the sanctuary's crown jewel, an adolescent Vruxar cub tearing through a titanium mesh enclosure like it was paper. A Frelkin handler limped away from the wreckage, one leg clearly dislocated at the hip. Medics swarmed. "Shut the ducts," someone barked in a dozen-limbed panic. Too late. The cub vanished into the ceiling vents. A Droa technician hissed through her spherical slits. "That is the 5th time it's breached perimeter this cycle. It bit a dermal implant off my assistant's face yesterday," the Krishan ambassador snapped, pressing a handkerchief over his scent glands. Stillness returned only when the sanctuary director, a towering, coral-hued Varnai named Jules, slithered to the podium. "My esteemed colleagues," Jules began, adjusting the translator node wrapped around its throat. "As you all know, we recovered the Vruxar cub from the scorched remains of Theta Colony on the Vergan Fringe. Its parents, apex predators of the Type 7 classification, perished in orbital bombardment. We rescued the cub with hopes of peaceful study. Instead, he gestured toward the screen now, showing static-laced footage of the cub hacking a hollow terminal with its claws. Lights dimmed across Section 9 as it overloaded a power grid. A nervous Frelkin singer opened her throat to speak, vocal sacs inflating. We tried song. Lullabies in the frequencies native to the Vruxar world. Harmonics we have used to calm sand leviathans. It only screamed louder. It shredded our mimic drone, the Krishan ambassador muttered. We painted it with 3 million cent nanites tuned to match a Vruxar matriarch. Still, it didn't work. The Droa rebuilt an entire biome from its home planet, growled a voice from the back. It took 5 hours to tear apart and 6 to set on fire. Jules tapped his terminal. A hologram blinked into the air, a snarling, 3-meter-long quadruped with amber eyes, oversized paws, and a mouthful of serrated teeth. The Vruxar cub. Juvenile, yes. But from the look in its eyes, it already knew how to kill. "We need fresh methodology," Jules declared. And we opened the challenge. All accredited xenobehaviorists, regardless of species or background, are now invited to attempt bonding protocols, provided they sign the liability waivers. A ripple of murmurs, hushed translations, holograms blinking with schedules and biometric failure rates. That's when the human arrived. He was late. The docking bay's alert light had already dimmed by the time Elliot stepped off the shuttle. Sleep creased one side of his face. His jacket was half-zipped, the other sleeve tied in a knot around his waist. He had no entourage, no translator implant, and no gear. Just a patched-up duffel bag over one shoulder, a thermos dangling from a carabiner, and a cardboard box with kitchen supplies scrawled across the top in black marker. Jules eyed the manifest with slow confusion. "You are Elliot McKinney?" "Yeah. Sorry. Shuttle got rerouted near Throsk Belt. Something about an ion storm. I came as soon as I could." "You are a registered ethologist?" "Technically, wildlife ecologist. I used to do rehab work. Wolverines, badgers, a few feral cats." Jules blinked once. "You are aware this is a Vruxar cub?" Elliot set the box down. "I read the brief. You've tried everything but letting it approach on its own terms, yeah?" The Krishan ambassador gave a guttural laugh. "You intend to speak to it?" "I intend to sit nearby and not provoke it." "With what strategy?" Elliot gave a small shrug. "Curiosity." He was escorted to the outer edge of the observation chamber, 2 transparent walls between him and the containment habitat. The room itself was reinforced, twice reinforced, and then lined with magnetic fields for good measure. The cub, still unseen, had reportedly been nesting in the far corner since its last episode. Elliot set his box down outside the second containment door. He didn't open it. He just knelt, slowly, placing the box upside down with the flaps tucked slightly open. Then he sat beside it, cross-legged, thermos resting by his knee, not speaking, not moving, just being. The room held its breath. 37 minutes passed. Then, movement. Amber eyes glinted from the shadows. The cub emerged, silent as a whisper, half-crouched, tail low. Every muscle in its lean, mottled frame tensed, its lip curled, revealing a flash of teeth. Elliot didn't flinch. The cub circled, its nostrils flared, it stared at the box. Something about the shape, the smell, the non-threatening geometry. It leaned closer, sniffed again, poked a claw at the flap. The box rustled. And to the collective gasp of 32 species watching in real time, the Vruxar cub pushed its snout inside. Then its shoulders. Then back paws. And finally, it curled, tail flicking once, and settled. Inside the box, sleeping. Elliot exhaled, softly. Guess cats really are the same everywhere, he muttered. Chaos followed. Alarms trilled, not from danger but from disbelief. Every monitor in the chamber replayed the footage on loop. Aliens surged to terminals, running scent diagnostics and emotional telemetry. Someone even whispered, "Sorcery." "He must emit calming neurophotonics," insisted a Droa xenologist, already running scans. "No, it's the cardboard. Earth cardboard must have pheromonal dampeners." His posture was too casual. It signaled non-hostility. "He is manipulating it telepathically." "Where did he get that box?" Jules muted the observation chamber. "Is this normal?" he asked. Elliot didn't look away from the cub, still asleep. No, not even a little. 3 hours later, the cub was still inside the box. When Elliot moved slightly to reach his thermos, it lifted its head, blinked at him once, then rested again. A low rumble from its chest, the Vruxar equivalent of a purr, vibrated faintly against the glass. By the time the rest of the sanctuary dimmed for its circadian cycle, the galaxy's most untamable predator was snoring inside what used to be a container for human spaghetti tongs. Elliot stayed seated, just watching. He scratched the faint red line on his forearm from when the cub had brushed past him earlier. One claw had grazed skin. Nothing deep, but it bled for a minute. Respect the teeth. That was Rule 1. Lights to 30%, he whispered. The habitat dimmed. The cub twitched once in its sleep, and 100 alien scientists stared at their data logs, wondering how a $2 cardboard box had broken centuries of xenobehavioral theory. 3 days after the box incident, the Vruxar cub had claimed a second box. This one was marginally smaller, previously used to store disposable biosample gloves. Elliot had fished it out of a recycling bin outside the lab wing, muttered something about small rooms for big moods, and placed it beside the first one. The cub, now occasionally referred to as Box 1 by alien observers, had sniffed the new arrival, examined its structural flaps with quiet intensity, then with the gravity of a religious ritual, climbed inside and dozed off for 23 minutes. 23 minutes of peace was a galactic record. Elliot, who had since been upgraded from civilian oddity to temporary consultant, remained seated at the edge of the habitat with his notebook open and a wrap of food he didn't finish. His left ankle was bandaged, a light sprain from when the cub pounced in what was either play or a calculated show of dominance. Elliot hadn't moved when it happened. He just waited, breathing slow, until the cub slinked back to its box and curled into itself like a canine thundercloud. "It's learning," he muttered, scribbling something under a doodle of paw prints. Or, pretending not to learn, clever little punk. The Droa Xenobehavior Committee didn't appreciate the terminology. "What precisely do you mean by punk?" one demanded through the comm, her 4-eye stalks twitching. "He's a teenager," Elliot said, rotating his ankle with a wince. "He's testing boundaries." "You imply sentience." "Look at what he did yesterday with the nutrient recycler. That's not instinct. That's experimentation." Yesterday's event had caused another stir. The cub had disassembled the feeder outlet, rerouted the tube, and rigged it to drop chunks of protein paste into the box while it lay inside. Self-feeding behavior, executed with tools. The Varnai director had summoned an emergency ethics panel immediately after. "Even if it shows cognitive learning," a Frelkin soprano had argued, "it is still a predator, a highly dangerous, untamed organism. We should consider transfer to a controlled biovault." A Droa biotechnician scoffed. After we've seen it voluntarily rest in the human's proximity, that's not threat response, that's bonding. What are we to do? Asked the Krishan ambassador. Turn Earth into a breeding ground for containment furniture? Jules finally addressed Elliot during the debate's recess. You have started something we cannot reproduce, he said, his tone flat. Other handlers have attempted similar postures, similar boxes. All have failed. They're overthinking it, Elliot replied. Or underthinking it. A silence stretched between them. You must understand, Jules said. We have tried simulation environments, gene harmonics, memory imprinting. Your box undermines decades of research. I didn't mean to undermine anything. Then explain it. Elliot looked through the glass, watching the cub gnaw at the corner of the smaller box like a toddler with a new toy. I didn't do anything. I just waited. That is not a method. Sure it is. Patience, non-threatening body language, predictable routine. Those are not measurable metrics. They are, if you stop measuring dominance. Jules didn't respond. 2 more days passed. The sanctuary adjusted to a new, cautious rhythm. The cub, now nicknamed Scrap by Elliot, though the name was not formally approved, emerged from his boxes at regular intervals. He sniffed Elliot's shoes. He ignored every food bowl not placed by Elliot. Once, when a robotic sweeper entered the room, Scrap leapt 3 meters, landed on it, and rode it halfway around the enclosure. He destroyed nothing. He bit no one. Elliot was still the only one allowed inside. By now, the cardboard boxes had become objects of worship. Droa archivists submitted a formal request for one of the original boxes to be preserved in a xenological museum. A Frelkin song assembly composed an 8-minute piece titled Elegy for the Folded Box. And a Krishan science envoy tried to patent adaptive cardboard enclosures based on Earth's designs. The request was denied. Earth's cardboard, it turned out, had no unique chemical properties. But the obsession continued. Within the week, 4 diplomatic ships arrived to witness the human effect. One ambassador from the Teal Collective demanded to examine Elliot for hidden biosignal emitters. He was politely asked to leave after attempting to scan Elliot's brain while he was asleep. Another ship brought crates labeled Xenosoft flexible containers that suspiciously resembled flattened boxes. None worked. Scrap flipped one with a claw and yawned theatrically. Elliot's patience, however, was starting to wear thin. His sleep had been erratic. His ankle still ached. He'd refused an autocast, knowing that any sudden change in his gait might alert the cub. The scratches on his arms had scabbed into itchy patches, and he flinched any time the cub lunged too fast, though he never pulled away. Jules visited him after a shift. You could return to quarters, Jules said. You need rest. We can monitor the cub remotely. Elliot shook his head. He notices when I leave. First time I tried, he jammed the door panel with a food tray. He waited. I don't think he trusts your doors. You are not a zoologist. You are exhausted. I worked feral rescue for 10 years, Director. This isn't new. He is not a feral. No, he's a kid who watched everything burn. Jules didn't speak again for a moment. Then he said quietly, You believe he remembers? Elliot stared at Scrap, now asleep again, this time with one paw half draped out of the box like a king claiming territory. Of course he does. He didn't just lose his parents. He lost his entire frame of reference. You think he doesn't notice you change the lights every time you enter? He knows who carries stun rods. He knows who tenses when they look at him. Jules lowered his gaze. He's not trying to dominate, Elliot continued. He's trying to survive. The next morning, the sanctuary's board received a message from the Galactic Behavioral Union, demanding a moratorium on furniture-based bonding initiatives until sufficient cross-species ethics evaluations could be conducted. By that afternoon, 300 crates of Earth-manufactured cardboard boxes had been requisitioned. None of them worked. A Frelkin intern broke 2 fingers, trying to coax the cub with a box full of treats. The cub sniffed, blinked, and walked away. Another Droa tried to mimic Elliot's seating posture. The cub hissed. When a robotic assistant attempted to place a box near the cub lunged, scratching a deep groove in the droid's hull, and retreated to its corner. Only when Elliot returned, limping slightly, clutching a box of instant noodles in his arms, did the cub re-emerge. And it followed him. Box tucked under one arm, noodle cup in the other, Elliot walked across the enclosure floor toward a quiet corner where he usually sat. Scrap padded behind him, paws silent, gaze alert. Elliot set the box down. Scrap climbed in. No one spoke. No one moved. One of the techs near the observation window whispered, "We're rewriting everything." Jules, watching from the shadows, finally spoke. "No, we're finally learning to shut up and listen." Scrap circled twice before slinking back into his corner box. Trial 1. Failed. The next morning, Elliot woke to find a note outside his temporary quarters. It was from one of the Droa linguists. "Your presence lowers tension, but your absence raises it exponentially. We are considering mirror imprinting techniques using your biometric data." He crumpled the note. "He doesn't need a mirror, he needs to feel safe. You can't simulate that." Trial 2 involved a Frelcon vocalist, a gentle species known for empathic frequencies. The singer's voice filled the room with layered tones, designed to mirror Elliot's heart rate and vocal rhythm. Scrap barely lifted his head. He stared, waited, then tore into the blanket Elliot had left beside him, shredding it into strips before dragging the pieces into his box like trophies. Trial 3 nearly worked. Jules himself entered, empty-handed, unarmed, and low to the floor. He didn't speak. He didn't look directly at the cub. Elliot was outside the glass. Scrap stepped forward. One paw. Two. Jules didn't move. The cub stopped a meter away, stared, and then turned, walked to the box Elliot had used as a seat 3 days prior, climbed in, and closed his eyes. Jules exhaled slowly. Progress? Elliot's face was unreadable. Maybe. But later that night, the cub chewed through the security sensor behind the habitat panel. No escape, just a warning. The message was clear. Don't leave me alone with them. The next morning was the last. 12 hours remained. Scrap had eaten half a ration. He hadn't played, he hadn't growled. He just sat, staring at the far wall. Elliot entered without gloves. He sat cross-legged again. No notebook, no thermos. Just him and the same box that had started it all. Scrap didn't move. "I'm not gonna lie," Elliot said quietly. "They're taking you unless we figure this out." A twitch of the tail. "I don't want you locked in a box for the rest of your life. Not the metal kind, anyway. You've already picked your box." Scrap blinked slowly. "Look, I get it. You've got no reason to trust anyone but me. But you can't live inside one person's shadow. You can't." He stopped. The cub had moved. It walked up to him, nose close, paw touching Elliot's knee. Elliot didn't move. Scrap leaned in and nosed the center of Elliot's chest, then turned and walked to the glass barrier. It stared at the door. And waited. A beat passed. Jules opened the outer door. Elliot stood slowly. "I think he's ready to try again." The final trial began with nothing more than a chair. Not a box, not a toy, not a scent sample. Just a basic stool placed at the far end of the enclosure, positioned deliberately, just out of Elliot's usual radius. A young Varnai behavioral intern named Tame volunteered. Quiet, scent-neutral, and barely taller than Scrap. Not a threatening presence by any species standard. Elliot sat on the floor as usual, arms folded loosely over his knees, voice calm but steady. "Remember," he murmured, "don't approach him. Let him come to you. Keep your weight low, don't fidget, and for the love of gravity, do not smile. He thinks it's a threat display." Thole nodded nervously. "I don't have lips." "Perfect, you're ahead of the game." The glass slid open. Scrap glanced at Elliot, then at Thole. For several long seconds, the cub didn't move. Then, slowly, cautiously, it padded toward the stool, not directly, but in an arc, as if skirting an invisible line of mistrust. Thole froze, posture impeccable. Scrap sniffed once, circled. And, to the stunned silence of the 23 observers, tuned in via live feed, climbed up and perched atop the stool like a living statue. Not curled, not lounging perched, like a wary sentinel. Jules spoke first, quietly, from the rear of the room. "Is this success?" Elliot didn't answer immediately. He rose carefully, one hand pressed to the ground for balance, and walked halfway toward the pair. Scrap didn't move. His gaze flicked from Elliot to Thuln, then back. "Yeah," Elliot said finally. "That's him saying, 'I'm watching, I don't hate this, I'll stay.'" It wasn't domestication. It wasn't obedience. But it was acceptance. In the hours that followed, the Containment Authority reviewed every frame of footage, every vitals log, every behavioral marker. There were meetings, debates, a short-lived scandal involving a falsified aggression rating submitted by one of the military liaisons, and finally, a single, unsigned clause added to the existing sanctuary charter. Entity 912 amperes, Vruxar cub, male, juvenile, is to remain under Sanctuary-Supervised Adaptive Care, SSAC, with human-registered behaviorist Elliot McKinney serving as primary non-invasive handler. Contingent on quarterly evaluations, subject shall not be transferred to isolation or containment without demonstrable cause. The veiled horizon departed the next day. It didn't wait to say goodbye. Elliot watched it shrink into the void from the upper concourse, thermos in hand, bandages still visible under the sleeve of his shirt. His ankle had healed enough to stop limping, though he still favored his right side when standing too long. His ribs were still sore from where Scrap had cannonballed into him 3 nights earlier during what could only be described as an ill-advised game of ambush the sleeping hominid. "I thought they'd fight harder," he said aloud. Jules stood beside him. "They did. You just weren't in the room for most of it." Elliot nodded. "Probably for the best." The director hesitated. "There is one more matter." Elliot took a sip. "Let me guess. Another ethics panel wants to dissect my methods." Jules handed him a datapad. "Worse, they want to replicate them." Elliot scrolled through the headline of a new Galactic Journal submission. "The McKinney Protocol, cardboard enclosure as a catalyst for non-dominant interspecies bonding." He squinted. "They're calling it a protocol now?" Jules pointed to a paragraph halfway down. "That part suggests your use of unrefined cellulose-based containment architecture triggers primitive nesting behavior in predator species." Elliot stared. "They're talking about boxes." "Yes. They could have just said boxes. They say your body language constituted a dynamic low-threat vector matrix." I sat still. "They called your posture adaptive submission masking." I was tired. The director tilted his head. "Your exhaustion may have been your most effective tool." Elliot chuckled. "I'll put that on my resume." Weeks passed. Scrap's environment expanded, first another 10 meters, then access to a multi-level climbing space, then interactive puzzles involving scent trails and food caches. Elliot was present for each upgrade. The cub learned boundaries, routines, even signals. He allowed 2 new handlers into his presence, one from the Droa, one from Earth. No one touched him without invitation. The boxes, however, remained sacred. At last count, there were 9. Each occupied at different times, in different moods. One had been torn and repaired 4 times. One was just the lid. The latest, a double-wall shipping container Elliot had received from Earth, became Scrap's chosen sleeping spot. He dragged fabric into it, bits of broken enrichment toys. One time, Elliot caught him trying to pull a discarded shoe inside. "He's hoarding," the Droa handler observed. Elliot shook his head. "He's nesting. There's a difference." Diplomatic dignitaries visited often now, some to witness the so-called miracle, others to quietly challenge it. During one such visit, a high-ranking Telian trade envoy asked Elliot if Earth intended to export these advanced cardboard systems. "They're just boxes," Elliot said again. "But perhaps," the envoy said, "there is a neurochemical imprint your species is unaware of." "Sure," Elliot sighed. "Let's go with that." By the end of the 3rd month, an interstellar import company on Mars reported a 900% increase in cardboard demand. Sanctuary staff had to place restrictions after Scrap began hoarding other species' boxes through the vents. The Droa lost 2 whole shipments of storage supplies before installing a biometric lock. The galactic scientific community remained divided. Some claimed Elliot had discovered an unknown predator behavior trigger. Others argued the cub simply bonded by coincidence. A rogue group of Frelkin theorists proposed that the box was irrelevant and that Elliot himself emitted calming frequencies only perceptible to apex juvenile brains. No one listened when Elliot said, maybe he just needed someone who didn't try to own him. 6 months later, Scrap followed Elliot everywhere. Not always close, sometimes 2 meters behind, sometimes waiting just around a corner, but always present. The cub had grown taller, bulkier. Still not full-grown, but powerful enough that even security teams kept their hands close to their stun gear whenever he passed. He didn't growl anymore, he didn't lunge, he didn't bite. But he never forgot the boxes. And neither did the galaxy. When Elliot was offered a permanent post as behavioral consultant for interspecies trauma rehabilitation, he asked if the position came with living quarters. It did. He asked if he could bring a Vruxar with him. After 37 meetings, 18 liability waivers, and one galaxy-wide public relations campaign titled "Compassion is Not Containment," the answer was yes. On the day they moved, Elliot packed his duffel bag. Scrap watched from across the room. Elliot pointed to the pile of boxes. "You can't take all of them." The cub blinked. "Pick one." Scrap growled low in his throat. Elliot raised an eyebrow. "You're too big for half of them anyway." Scrap walked to the largest, scratched, dented, chewed at the corners. He sniffed it once, then stepped inside. The walls bent a little but held. Elliot smiled. Later, as the transport ship ascended from the sanctuary hangar, 2 figures sat near the viewport, one human, sipping old coffee from a scratched thermos, and one juvenile Vruxar, curled awkwardly in a battered cardboard box. Outside, among the trade lanes and orbital markers, cargo vessels blinked by. One of them, flagged from Earth, carried nothing but flattened boxes and the words, "Fragile, Advanced Domestication Systems," stamped in bold across the side.